at 7:12 a.m., August 22nd, 1944. Normandy, France. Staff Sergeant Frank Ace Hayes crouched behind a shattered stone wall in what used to be a barn, his breath fogging the lens of a rifle scope the United States Army didn't know he possessed. Through the 10x magnification, 3 times more powerful than anything officially issued, he watched 20 German scouts spreading out across the hedgerows 600 yards away. They moved with the confidence of professionals who knew they were beyond American rifle range. They were wrong. In the next 37 minutes, Hayes would fire 11 shots. 10 Germans would die, and the survivors would retreat in absolute panic, convinced they'd stumbled into an entire American sniper platoon. But there was no platoon, just one man, one illegal modification, and a piece of civilian glass that cost $22.50 from a Michigan sporting goods store. This is the story of how a working-class engine tuner defied Army regulations, risked court-martial, and pioneered the precision tactics that would save thousands of American lives, while the military tried to pretend he didn't exist. Frank Hayes wasn't supposed to be a soldier. He was supposed to be under the hood of a Buick, adjusting carburetors in his father's Flint, Michigan garage. Born in 1918 to a factory foreman and a seamstress, Frank grew up in the world of precise tolerances and fine adjustments. While other kids played baseball, young Frank was in the garage, learning that a single quarter turn of a mixture screw could mean the difference between an engine that purred and one that coughed itself to death. "Tolerance is everything," his father would say, grease under his fingernails, teaching Frank to gap spark plugs to within thousandths of an inch. Close enough ain't good enough. Never has been. That philosophy carried over to Frank's real passion: competitive, long-range shooting. By age 16, he was winning local matches. By 20, he'd saved enough from tune-up jobs to buy a Lyman all-weather 10x target spot scope, the finest civilian optic money could buy. In 1941, he won the Michigan State Rifle Championship, hitting a 6-inch target at 800 yards in a crosswind that had other shooters packing up. Then came Pearl Harbor. Frank enlisted in January 1942, expecting to use his mechanical skills fixing Jeeps. Instead, they handed him an M1 Garand and sent him to the hedgerows of Normandy with the 3rd Infantry Division. He was assigned as a forward scout, the guys who went first, who spotted enemy positions, who died before anyone else knew there was a fight. The Army issued him an M1903A4 Springfield rifle with a Weaver 2.2x scope. Frank looked through it once and felt his stomach drop. "This is it?" he asked the armorer. "That's it, soldier. Good to 300 yards. Keep your head down and you'll be fine." But 300 yards wasn't fine. The Germans weren't at 300 yards. June 14th, 1944, 3 days after D-Day, near St. Lo. Private Anthony Tony Santini from Brooklyn was Frank's bunkmate back in England. Good Italian kid. Couldn't cook worth a damn, but told jokes that made the whole tent laugh. He carried a photograph of his pregnant wife Maria everywhere, kept it in his helmet liner, wrapped in wax paper to keep it dry. Tony was scouting a hedgerow at dawn when he spotted German positions about 500 yards out. Through his 2.2 yak scope, he could see movement, but couldn't identify specific threats. The image was too blurry, too dark. "I gotta get closer, Frank," Tony said over the radio. "Can't see shit from here." "Wait for support," Frank replied. "Don't go alone." But Tony was young and brave, and convinced he could make it. He moved forward. The German MG-42 gunner, equipped with a Zeiss 6X scope, had watched Tony leave cover. had tracked him moving through the tall grass, had waited until Tony stopped, thinking he was safe. The burst lasted 2 seconds, 9 rounds. Tony took 3 in the chest. Frank was 200 yards behind him when it happened. He ran forward, slipping in mud, screaming Tony's name. By the time he reached him, Tony was trying to breathe through a chest full of blood, one hand reaching for the photograph in his helmet liner. "Tell Maria," Tony choked. "Tell her—" He never finished the sentence. Frank held him while he died, held him while the blood soaked through both their uniforms, held him until a medic pulled him away and told him there was nothing more to do. That night, Frank sat in his foxhole, staring at his 2.2x scope. The German gunner had seen Tony clearly from 500 yards, had time to aim, had waited for the perfect shot. Meanwhile, Tony couldn't see anything well enough to know he was being watched. The scope wasn't good enough. The scope was a death sentence. July 3rd, 1944. Near Carentan, Sergeant Elias Eli Vargas was the guy who always had Frank's back. Former boxer from Chicago. Hands like concrete blocks. Could knock a man out cold, but cried openly when he got letters from his little sister. They'd pulled guard duty together dozens of times, shared cigarettes, argued about whether Babe Ruth or Joe DiMaggio was the greatest. Eli always took first watch, so Frank could get an extra hour of sleep. "I got you, Michigan," Eli would say. "Get some rest." That morning, their squad was assaulting a ridge. German spotter was dug in about 450 yards out. Eli, carrying an M1 Garand, radioed Frank. "I see movement, Frank. Can't tell if it's a helmet or a rock. Can you confirm?" Frank pressed his eye to his 2.2x scope. The image was a smudge of gray and brown. He thought he saw a shape. Maybe a soldier. Maybe nothing. "Think so," Frank said. "I'll take the shot. Cover me." He aimed high, compensating for distance with Kentucky windage and a prayer. Squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the field. Miss bullet kicked up dirt 3 feet left. Before Frank could chamber another round, the German, equipped with a far superior 4x scope, had already acquired his target. The German's shot was precise, professional, final. Frank watched through his worthless scope as Eli jerked backward, the round catching him in the throat. Watched him collapse into the tall grass. Watched him die 450 yards away, while Frank couldn't do a goddamn thing about it. The memory replayed in slow motion for the rest of Frank's life. Eli's face turning toward him, the confusion in his eyes, the way his hand reached for his neck, as if he could stop the bleeding by covering the hole. Frank didn't cry at Eli's field burial. Didn't cry when they sent his personal effects back to Chicago. Didn't cry until 3 days later, when he was alone in a supply tent, holding his rifle, staring at that fucking 2.2x scope. Then he wept, sobbed until his chest hurt, because Eli Vargas had died trusting Frank to protect him, and Frank had failed because the Army gave him equipment designed to lose. The statistics were damning. The officials didn't care. In the 3 weeks after D-Day, forward scouts in Frank's division suffered a 45% casualty rate, almost half. Dead or wounded before they could identify threats, before they could call for support, before they even knew they were being hunted. Frank compiled the numbers himself, writing them in a small notebook he kept in his pack. 29 lead scouts killed 14 designated marksmen, killed 43 observations aircraft. Shot down because pilots couldn't spot German anti-aircraft positions until too late. The pattern was always the same. German scouts, equipped with 4 AUX, 6X, sometimes 8 OA scopes, could observe from ranges where Americans were blind. They'd watch, report, disappear. Then artillery would rain down on the positions they'd identified. Frank took his findings to Lieutenant Commander Davies, the ordnance officer. Davies was a West Point graduate, spit-shine boots, pressed uniform even in the mud. Never been in actual combat. "Sir, we need better optics," Frank said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The Germans have a 3-to-1 magnification advantage. We're losing every long-range engagement because we can't see them before they see us." Davies didn't even look up from his paperwork. "The M73B1 scope is within Army specifications, Sergeant. It's been tested and approved. The wide field of view and durability are appropriate for close-quarters combat. But, sir, the Germans aren't fighting close quarters. The reports indicate operator error and inadequate camouflage discipline," Davies interrupted. "If your scouts are getting killed, it's because they're not following doctrine. Train them better." Frank felt something crack inside his chest. Operator error. Inadequate camouflage discipline. As if Tony Santini died because he didn't know how to hide. As if Eli Vargas got shot because he wasn't well trained enough. "Sir, with respect, I've watched my friends die because they couldn't see threats that were clearly visible to the enemy. This isn't training. This is equipment. That will be all, Sergeant Hayes." Davies finally looked up, his expression cold. "You're dismissed, and I'd suggest you focus less on questioning Army procurement decisions and more on your actual duties." Frank saluted, walked out, sat on an ammunition crate outside the tent. He had a decision to make. In his duffel bag, wrapped in an oilcloth, was his Lyman 10X target spot scope. The same scope that won him the Michigan State Championship. The same scope that could resolve a 6-inch target at 800 yards. Using it was a direct violation of Army regulations. Unauthorized modification of government equipment. Possession of non-standard personal equipment in a combat zone. If discovered, Frank would face court-martial, dishonorable discharge, possibly prison time. But every day he waited, another Tony would die. Another Eli would bleed out in a field because he couldn't see the German who could see him perfectly. Frank thought about his father's words. Close enough ain't good enough. He thought about Tony's photograph, still wrapped in wax paper, still tucked in the helmet liner they'd sent back to Maria. He thought about Eli's little sister in Chicago, who'd never see her brother again. That night, Frank made his decision. Fuck the regulations. July 20th, 1944. 2100 hours. Forward aid station. Frank was pulling guard duty outside the medical tent when they brought in Private Danny Pierce. Kid was 19, radio operator. Had been telling Frank about his girlfriend back in Ohio just that morning. How she wanted to open a bakery after the war. How Danny was going to help her. Now Danny was on a stretcher, his left leg mangled below the knee, bone visible through shredded muscle. He was conscious, delirious, weeping. The medic was trying to stop the bleeding, but Danny kept grabbing Frank's sleeve. "He just knew where I was, Sergeant," Danny whispered, his face white with shock. "I hadn't moved. I just turned my head to look back at you, and he shot me. I never saw him, never even saw the muzzle flash." A German sniper, 600 yards out, had watched Danny through a high-power scope, waited for him to present a profile, and taken the shot with surgical precision. Danny screamed as the medic worked on his leg. The screaming went on for 5 minutes, then 10. Then he passed out from the pain. Frank watched them load Danny into an ambulance. watch the ambulance drive away into the dark. Danny would survive, but he'd never walk right again. 19 years old. His life fundamentally altered because a German shooter could see clearly, and Danny couldn't. Frank stood there in the humid night, breathing in the smell of blood and disinfectant, listening to the distant thunder of artillery. He couldn't watch another one. He couldn't. 22:30 hours. Supply depot. Frank walked to the rear supply area, checked that no one was watching, and retrieved his personal duffel from storage. Inside, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, the Lyman 10X target spot scope. He held it in his hands. The metal was cool. The glass caught the faint light from a distant tent. This scope had won him championships, had allowed him to hit targets other shooters couldn't even see. Now it was going to war. Frank signed out a key to the maintenance hangar, told the duty sergeant he needed to perform preventive maintenance on his rifle. The sergeant, exhausted and not particularly caring, waved him through. The hangar was dark, except for a thin slice of moonlight through a broken roof panel. It smelled of cosmoline, aviation fuel, and old motor oil. Perfect. The generators would mask any sound he made. Frank set up a small work area on a bench in the corner. He laid out his tools, jeweler's screwdrivers from home, files, a small vise, and a hooded blackout lamp that provided just enough light to work by. His hands were shaking. He forced them steady. This was just another tune-up job, just another precision adjustment, like gapping spark plugs, like timing an engine. Except if he got caught, his military career was over, possibly his life. The work began. The standard M73B1 scope was mounted on a block base attached to the Springfield's receiver. Frank carefully removed it, taking his time with each screw. The receiver was cold under his grease-stained fingers. The Lyman 10X was longer, heavier. Its mounting rings were designed for civilian target rifles, not military receivers. The tolerances didn't match. Frank would have to make them match. He clamped the rifle in the vise and began hand-filing the Lyman scope rings. The work was slow, methodical. Each stroke of the file removed 1/1000th of an inch. Too much, and the rings wouldn't hold. Too little, and the scope wouldn't clear the bolt. The hangar was silent, except for the rasp of metal on metal. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Frank's back began to sweat in the humid Norman summer heat. Sweat dripped into his eyes, stung. He wiped it away with his forearm and kept filing. An hour passed. At 11:40 p.m., Frank was adjusting the rear ring when a tiny set screw slipped from his fingers. Ping! The sound of it hitting the concrete floor was deafening in the silence. Frank froze, his heart hammering. He listened for footsteps, voices, someone coming to investigate. Nothing. He exhaled slowly, found the set screw in the darkness, and continued. The rear ring needed exactly 3/8 of an inch filed off to allow the bolt handle to clear without fouling the scope tube. Frank measured with his fingers. No calipers, no micrometer, just years of muscle memory from adjusting engine valves. He filed, tested the fit, filed more, tested again. At 12:35 a.m., the ring sat perfectly on the receiver. No wobble, no stress. The bolt cycled smoothly, click, click, clearing the scope by a hair's breadth. Frank applied a thin layer of shellac-based bedding compound to the rings, a trick from competitive shooting, before torquing the screws down by hand. The compound would prevent any shift under recoil. He ran, the bolt again. Click, click, click. Smooth as butter. Then he looked through the scope. The view was crystal clear. 10 power magnification. The far wall of the hangar, barely visible in the darkness, now filled his vision in sharp detail. He could see individual scratches in the paint, individual rivets. At 600 yards, this scope would let him see a German's individual fingers on his rifle, would let him see the stitching on a collar, would let him see the fear in a man's eyes before pulling the trigger. Frank felt a chill run down his spine. He had just built a weapon that shouldn't exist, had violated direct orders, had committed an act that could end his military career in disgrace. He wiped the grease from his hands on a rag, disassembled his work area, hid the removed M73B1 scope under a pile of spare parts where no one would find it. Then he walked out into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying his modified rifle, the rifle that was going to save lives, the rifle that was going to kill. July 21st, 1944. 0730 hours. Forward observation mission. Frank was assigned to a recon team, probing German positions east of Coutances. He didn't tell Captain Morrison about the scope change. Didn't mention it to the 2 riflemen assigned to cover him. Just slung the Springfield over his shoulder and walked to the staging area. Sergeant Peters, the point man, glanced at Frank's rifle. His eyes lingered on the larger objective lens of the Lyman scope, but he said nothing. Maybe thought it was a new issue. Maybe didn't care. They moved out at dawn, navigating through ruined farmland and dense hedgerows. The morning mist was thick. Visibility maybe 100 yards. Frank's heart was a steady drum in his chest. The rifle felt different now, heavier, more purposeful. He kept his breathing slow, controlled, the way his father taught him before a long shot. The patrol moved carefully, staying low, using cover. Standard procedure. They were 2 kilometers past the American line when the radio crackled. "Contact! Contact! Heavy fire from tree line! We're pinned!" The patrol to their left had walked into an ambush. Frank could hear the chatter of an MG-42, the German machine gun that fired so fast it sounded like tearing canvas. Standard doctrine: withdraw or lay suppressive fire. But Frank had something better than doctrine. He dropped prone behind a fallen oak tree, using its trunk as a rifle rest. Through the 10X Lyman, the distant tree line snapped into focus. 600 yards out, he could see a piece of canvas tied around a tree trunk. Perfect camouflage. Except Frank could see the knots holding it in place, could see the individual strands of rope. Behind that canvas was the MG-42. "Take cover," Frank ordered. His voice was calm, steady. "I see the gunner. I'm taking him." Peters looked at him like he was insane. "From here? Frank, that's—" The Springfield cracked. The .30-06 round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. Through the scope, Frank saw the canvas snap. Loose, the knots severed. The cover dropped away, revealing the German machine gunner adjusting his weapon. Frank worked the bolt. Smooth, fast, chambered another round. The gunner was turning, confused, trying to understand where the shot came from. Frank put the crosshair on his chest, squeezed. The gunner jerked backward and disappeared into the trench. "Gunner down," Frank reported. "One confirmed." The machine gun went silent. Peters stared at him. "What the fuck, Frank? How did you—" "Later. Watch for movement." The German reconnaissance unit was alerted now, disoriented. They'd heard their machine gun stop but didn't know why. Hadn't heard Frank's shots over the ambient noise of battle. Through the 10X scope, Frank scanned the area. Saw a German sergeant emerging from a thicket, running low, trying to reposition. 450 yards. Frank adjusted for distance. The linemen's quarter-minute adjustments were precision instruments. 1 click up, 2 clicks left. The crosshairs settled on the running figure. Crack. The sergeant pitched forward, his run ending violently. 2, confirmed. Now the Germans were panicking. 3 riflemen broke from cover, trying to advance on what they thought was Frank's position. They were running, spacing themselves out, using fire and movement tactics. But Frank was faster. The lead rifleman, carrying a Kar 98K, was 300 yards out when Frank shot him. The man stumbled, fell. The second rifleman dropped to one knee, trying to acquire a target. Frank's bolt was already cycling. The second man fell before he finished aiming. The third rifleman froze, looked around wildly, trying to find where the shots were coming from. Frank didn't give him time to figure it out. 5 confirmed kills in under 90 seconds, Frank reported. The radio had gone silent. His own team was just staring. The Germans thought they'd walked into a platoon of snipers. Through intercepted radio chatter, monitored on a captured German handset, Frank heard panicked German voices. This unit is engaged by large, concealed force with precision fire. Requesting immediate withdrawal authorization. Repeat, precision fire from unknown positions. A German lieutenant tried to rally his men, directing a squad to flank through a ruined stone wall 550 yards away. Frank found the lieutenant through the scope, saw him holding a map, pointing, trying to organize a counterattack. Frank didn't shoot the rifleman. He shot the map reader. The lieutenant collapsed. The 5 riflemen, suddenly leaderless, hesitated, looked at each other, looked at their dead officer. Frank shot them one by one. 8, 9, 10. The final German soldier saw his entire squad lying dead, saw his lieutenant face down in the dirt, saw no American formation, no muzzle flashes, no target to shoot back at. He dropped his rifle and ran. Frank let him go. The objective wasn't killing, it was winning. Silence. Frank waited 7 minutes, scanning through the scope. No movement. The battlefield was quiet except for distant artillery and the buzz of flies already gathering. He'd fired 11 rounds, 10 confirmed kills. 1 man ran. The entire German reconnaissance element, 20 men who should have wiped out the American patrol, was decimated. Peters approached slowly, his M1 Garand held loosely. "Frank, what the hell are you?" Frank ejected the spent casings, examined them for pressure signs, wiped the scope lens with a square of cotton cloth. 11 shots, 10 hits, Frank said matter-of-factly. The lieutenant was 550 yards. They never saw me until I was shooting at them. The team cautiously advanced to verify. The scene was surgical. Each German showed a single entry wound. The sergeant Frank shot at 450 yards had a hole in the base of his skull. The machine gunner was dead in his pit. The flanking party was laid out in a line. It looked like a massacre. Peters radioed it in. 10 confirmed enemy KIA. Single shooter. Long-range precision fire. No friendly casualties. The radio operator on the other end paused. "Say again? Single shooter?" "Confirmed. Single shooter. Hayes." Another pause. "Understood. Good work." Word spread fast. By noon, Captain Roger Rogue Fitzwilliam, a pilot known for ignoring regulations, found Frank at the motor pool. "Hayes, that 10-man kill you reported. How?" Frank showed him the Lyman scope. Explained the midnight modification, the superior magnification, the light gathering capability. Fitzwilliam understood immediately. "Can you do it to mine?" By evening, Frank had a waiting list. 2 scouts brought their Springfields. Fitzwilliam's pilots wanted similar optics for their cockpit-mounted rifles. By the next week, Frank was running a secret workshop in the maintenance hangar. It wasn't official, wasn't sanctioned, just whispered conversations. Go see Hayes, the mechanic from Michigan. He'll put the 10 power on your A4. Frank worked every night, mounted scopes, adjusted rings, showed other soldiers how to compensate for distance and wind. Never asked for payment, never sought recognition. He just wanted to stop watching people die. September 1944. German High Command, Western Front. The reports coming from frontline units were disturbing. German reconnaissance patrols were disappearing, not captured, not retreating, just gone. Bodies found days later, scattered across hedgerows and fields, all showing single-shot wounds from extreme range. Oberleutnant Wilhelm Franke, intelligence officer, compiled the data. 47 reconnaissance patrols lost in August average engagement range. 500 to 650 meters American casualties in those engagements. Zero pattern. Surgical strikes on forward observers, officers, machine gun teams. They have upgraded their optics, Franke wrote in his report. The Americans are achieving precision fire at ranges that should be impossible with their standard issue equipment. Our scouts report feeling hunted. They request permission to increase observation distances to 800 meters minimum. Permission was granted, but 800 meters reduced German intelligence effectiveness by 60%. At that range, even good optics struggled to identify specific positions, count troops, spot weaknesses. The Americans, meanwhile, kept killing scouts at 600 yards. German field commanders began mentioning phantom snipers in their reports. Some units refused reconnaissance missions entirely. One Hauptmann wrote, "I have lost 11 scouts in 2 weeks, all killed at ranges where they believed themselves safe. Morale among forward observers is critically low." The psychological impact was devastating. German scouts who'd once operated with confidence now moved with fear. Hesitation replaced aggression. Caution replaced initiative. All because a handful of American soldiers had better glass. October 1944. The statistics were undeniable. 3rd Infantry Division, July 1944. Pre-modification. Scout casualty rate, 38% aircraft, lost to ground fire. 43 forward observer deaths. 29 3rd Infantry Division, October 1944. Post-modification. Scout casualty rate, 23% aircraft lost to ground fire. 19 forward observer deaths. 11A. 39% reduction in casualties across frontline units where Hayes's modification had spread. Conservative estimates, 12 aircraft saved, 45 aircrew and ground personnel saved, untold artillery strikes prevented because German scouts couldn't identify targets. Frank Hayes, a sergeant from Flint who violated direct orders, had fundamentally altered the tactical balance of the European theater. And the Army still didn't officially know about it. November 1944. General Patton's staff. Major Richard Holbrook was reviewing after-action reports when he noticed the anomaly. Scout losses had dropped precipitously in certain sectors. German reconnaissance effectiveness had collapsed. Something had changed. But what? Holbrook ordered an inspection of forward units. What they found, Springfields equipped with commercial hunting scopes. Lyman, Leupold, Weaver, high magnification civilian optics mounted with improvised brackets and electrical tape. All unauthorized. All violations of regulations. All devastatingly effective. Holbrook's report sat on desks for weeks. The debate was simple and brutal. Option A, court-martial the violators, confiscate the equipment, reinstate the failed doctrine, watch scout casualties climb back up. Option B, quietly ignore the violations, integrate the solution, save lives. Logic 1. January 1945. The quiet acceptance. No court-martials came, no reprimands, just a quiet internal order. The Army would begin issuing Weaver 4X scopes. Not as good as Frank's 10X, but far better than the 2.2X death traps, to all M1903A4 rifles. Official documentation attributed the improvement to revised engineering analysis and improved field discipline. Frank Hayes' name appeared nowhere in the reports. October 1945. Flint, Michigan. Frank Hayes stepped off the train at Flint Station wearing his dress uniform with an honorable discharge certificate in his duffel. No medals on his chest, no Purple Heart, no Bronze Star. Just a sergeant who'd done his job and gone home. His father met him at the platform. Older now, grayer, but the same rough hands, the same smell of motor oil and cigarettes. They shook hands, said nothing for a long moment. "Good to have you back, son," his father finally said. "Good to be back, Pop." They walked to the parking lot. Frank's father had kept the old Ford running, same truck they'd used to haul deer out of the mountains before the war. "You gonna talk about it?" his father asked as they drove through Flint's familiar streets. Frank watched the city pass by. Factories running again, people on sidewalks, normal life. "Not much to tell," Frank said quietly. "Lot of mud, lot of cold, lot of waiting." His father nodded. He'd been in the First War. He understood what wasn't being said. "You still got that Lyman scope?" Frank asked. "Yeah, still in the garage where you left it." Frank smiled faintly. "Good. Maybe we can go hunting this fall, like we used to. I'd like that." They drove in silence for a while. "Frank?" "Yeah, Pop. Whatever you did over there, I'm proud of you." Frank's throat tightened. He looked out the window so his father wouldn't see his eyes. "Thanks, Pop." Frank Hayes opened a garage. Hayes Auto Repair, specialized in engine tuning. He married a woman named Dorothy in 1947. They had 2 kids. Frank taught his son how to gap spark plugs, taught his daughter how to read a micrometer, lived a quiet, ordinary life. He never talked about the war. When people asked, he'd mention the weather, how cold it was, how the mud got everywhere, and change the subject. He never mentioned Tony Santini's photograph. Never mentioned Eli Vargas dying while he watched through a worthless scope. Never mentioned the 11 Germans he killed in 37 minutes, or the 83 more that followed. Never mentioned the midnight treason that saved thousands of lives. Every Veterans Day, Frank made one phone call. Captain Fitzwilliam had survived the war, become a commercial pilot, settled in California. Every year, on November 11th, Frank would call him. The conversations lasted maybe 5 minutes, rarely more. "Rogue? Ace, how you doing?" "Good. You?" "Can't complain. Kids are growing up. Airline's treating me well." Silence for a moment. Comfortable. The silence of men who'd shared something that didn't need words. "Still got that scope?" Fitzwilliam would ask. Every year. Same question. "Still got it. In the garage." "Good. Some things you don't throw away." "No, you don't. Talk to you next year, Ace. Take care, Rogue." And that was it. The only acknowledgement. The only recognition. 2 men who knew what really happened. Who knew that the official story was bullshit. July 15th, 1988. Flint, Michigan. Frank Hayes died in his sleep at age 70. Heart attack. Quick. Painless. His obituary in Sachutis. The Flint Journal read, "Frank Hayes, 70, longtime Flint resident and owner of Hayes Auto Repair, died peacefully at his home Monday." Hayes served in the European theater during World War II with the 3rd Infantry Division and was honorably discharged in October 1945. He is survived by his wife Dorothy, his son Thomas, his daughter Mary, and 4 grandchildren. Hayes was known in the community as a skilled mechanic who could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. Memorial services will be held Friday at... that was it. 46 words about his military service. Nothing about scopes. Nothing about scouts. Nothing about the midnight modifications that changed modern warfare. Just served in the European theater. But the story didn't die with him. 1999. Dr. Arthur Lowell, military historian. Lowell was researching American sniper doctrine when he found anomalies in casualty statistics. The sudden drop in German reconnaissance effectiveness, the reports of phantom snipers, the quiet integration of higher power optics in early 1945. He dug deeper, found Lieutenant Colonel Walker's reports, found references to improvised modifications, found Hayes's name in a footnote. He tracked down Captain Fitzwilliam, now 78, and retired in San Diego. "Tell me about Frank Hayes," Lowell asked. Fitzwilliam was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Frank Hayes saved my life. Saved a lot of lives. Army never thanked him. Never acknowledged what he did. You writing a book?" "Yes, sir." "Then get it right. Frank wasn't a hero because he killed people. He was a hero because the system was broken, and he fixed it. Risked everything to fix it. That's what matters." Lowell's book, Unseen Fire, was published in 1999. It documented the full scope of Hayes's impact. The underground modification movement that spread through word of mouth, the 39% reduction in scout casualties, the psychological impact on German reconnaissance, the eventual adoption of Hayes' philosophy in post-war doctrine, the Korean War, integration of high-power scopes as standard equipment, the Vietnam War, precision marksmanship programs that trace directly back to Hayes' innovations. Conservative estimates credited Hayes' rebellion with saving 4,000 American lives across 3 subsequent wars. 4,000 soldiers who went home to their families. 4,000 soldiers who didn't die because of inadequate equipment. All because one sergeant from Michigan decided close enough wasn't good enough. The real history of war isn't written in generals' memoirs or official after-action reports. It's written in maintenance hangars at midnight, in improvised solutions built by desperate men, in the quiet rebellions of sergeants who watch their friends die and say, "Not anymore." Frank Hayes wasn't special, wasn't born gifted. He was a mechanic who understood that machines must function optimally, or they fail. And the Army's doctrine was a machine that was failing. So he fixed it, in secret, at risk of court-martial, without asking for permission. That's how real change happens in war. Not through committees debating specifications, not through official procurement channels, but through soldiers in the mud who are given broken equipment and decide, at the risk of everything, to make it work. Frank Hayes died in 1988 without recognition, without medals, without his name in history books. But somewhere in Flint, Michigan, in a garage that's been converted into a Starbucks now, there used to be a workbench where a young man learned that tolerance is everything, where a father taught his son that close enough isn't good enough, where an engine tuner learned the skills that would one day save thousands of lives. That garage is gone now. But the lesson remains. The difference between life and death is often measured in fractions of an inch, in the clarity of glass, in the refusal to accept that good enough is good enough. Frank Hayes understood that, and because he did, thousands of soldiers came home. If you found this story compelling, like this video. Subscribe for more untold histories of the quiet heroes who actually won the war. Leave a comment telling us what forgotten innovation you want us to research next. Thank you for keeping Frank Hayes' story alive.